Summer, 1943. The North Atlantic is the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth. Beneath the waves, German U-boats stalk Allied convoys, determined to starve Britain into submission. Every month, tankers and cargo ships vanish beneath torpedoes. Every month, thousands of tons of supplies sink to the ocean floor. The Allies respond with destroyers, depth charges, and long-range patrol bombers. Yet one problem remains. The U-boats can dive. Once submerged, they become elusive, almost untouchable. The battle often comes down to a matter of seconds in which the submarine must be destroyed before it disappears below. From this desperate need, a radical idea emerges. Engineers take the de Havilland Mosquito, a fast and elegant wooden aircraft, and fit it with one of the largest guns ever mounted on a fighter plane, a 57mm Molins cannon, the same weapon used to smash through the armor of German tanks. The RAF calls this new variant the Mosquito FB Mark 18. Crews simply call it the Tsetse, after the African fly with a lethal bite. Fewer than 30 will ever be built, but each carries a weapon that can cripple a submarine with a single hit. This is the story of one of the strangest and boldest weapons of the Second World War II, the Mosquito. A wooden predator, armed with a tank gun, that hunted German U-boats across the Bay of Biscay and changed the war beneath the waves. The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest continuous campaign of the Second World War, and by 1943, its outcome was still uncertain. German U-boats prowled the shipping lanes, sinking Allied convoys in staggering numbers. For Britain, dependent on food, oil, and weapons shipped from North America, every freighter that went down meant the lifeline of the nation was being cut thread by thread. The Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force had developed methods to fight back. Radar-equipped patrol aircraft could spot submarines on the surface. Escort destroyers and corvettes launched depth charges into the sea. New weapons, such as rockets and acoustic homing torpedoes, were tested with growing success. Yet one problem remained unsolved: speed. When a U-boat was caught on the surface, its commander had only seconds to order a crash dive. If the submarine submerged in time, even the most determined attack often failed. Allied weapons could not deliver an instant, crippling blow in those brief, critical moments. It was here that engineers proposed something audacious. If rockets scattered too widely and bombs required precise positioning, why not use a gun, a very large gun? The British 6-pounder, a 57mm anti-tank weapon, had already proven itself against German armor in North Africa. With modifications by the Molins company, it could be fitted with an automatic loader, giving a fighter aircraft a rapid-firing cannon capable of discharging 25 rounds without manual reloading. The de Havilland Mosquito was chosen as the testbed. Its strong but lightweight wooden frame, twin-engine power, and adaptability made it the ideal candidate. Pilots were already calling it the Wooden Wonder. Now it would be transformed into a predator with a bite as deadly as a destroyer's deck gun. The RAF designated the variant the Mosquito FB Mark 18. But among aircrews, a different name stuck: the Tsetse. Like the African fly whose sting could kill cattle with disease, this mosquito promised to be a rare but lethal threat. A small number of aircraft with the ability to deliver catastrophic damage. By mid-1943, the first Tsetses were delivered to 248 Squadron of Coastal Command, based in Britain's southwest. Their mission was clear: fly deep into the Bay of Biscay, intercept U-boats leaving their French bases, and strike them down before they could dive. It was an experiment born of desperation, but one that promised to change the rhythm of the Atlantic War. The men who flew the Tsetse soon discovered that this strange hybrid of aircraft and artillery would make every patrol an exercise in nerve, precision, and raw firepower. In the summer of 1943, the first Mosquito FB Mark 18s, the Tsetse variant, joined 248 Squadron of RAF Coastal Command, stationed at Predenac in Cornwall. These crews were veterans of long patrols over the Bay of Biscay, one of the most dangerous hunting grounds of the war. From this narrow stretch of water, German U-boats left their French bases at Lorient, Brest, and Saint-Nazaire to reach the open Atlantic. For Coastal Command, the bay was a killing ground for both hunter and hunted. The arrival of the Tsetse caused a stir among pilots and ground crews alike. The nose of the Mosquito looked different, almost brutish, dominated by the long barrel of the 57mm Molins cannon. Mechanics loaded the shells carefully, each one weighing over 6 pounds, while pilots studied gunnery tables that looked more suited to an artillery battery than an aircraft squadron. The first patrols tested the aircraft's handling. Pilots discovered that the Mosquito remained fast and agile, though the recoil from the cannon was fierce. But the true test would come in combat, against the enemy it had been built to destroy. That test came within weeks. On a grey morning over the bay, a Tsetse crew spotted the silhouette of a surfaced U-boat. The submarine's crew was caught in the open, some on deck, others working around the conning tower. The Mosquito dove low, lining up its sights. At 200 yards, the pilot squeezed the trigger. The sound was unlike anything heard from a fighter before a thunderous crack, the nose shuddering as the shell tore downrange. It struck the submarine's casing with devastating effect, sending fragments of steel flying into the air. The crew scattered in panic. A second shell followed, smashing through the conning tower. A third exploded near the deck gun, shredding it in place. The U-boat commander ordered an emergency dive, but the submarine's luck had already run out. The cannon shells had ruptured vital systems. As the boat slipped beneath the waves, a thick oil slick spread across the surface. For the Mosquito crew, the moment was surreal. In just seconds, they had achieved what normally required depth charges and multiple aircraft, a direct crippling blow to a submarine. The official report noted simply, "Target damaged. Large oil patch observed. Submarine unable to continue patrol." Over the following weeks, more engagements followed. Sometimes the Tsetse would attack alone. More often, it worked in tandem with rocket-armed Mosquitoes, striking first to disable a U-boat, then letting the strike wing finish the kill. The tactic proved effective. The 57mm shells could pierce pressure hulls, making it impossible for the submarine to dive, while rockets and depth charges delivered the final blow. German accounts reveal the psychological shock. Survivors described the fear of seeing a Mosquito with a single giant barrel in its nose diving toward them at high speed. They knew rockets could miss, but if just one 57mm shell struck the hull, their submarine was doomed. By autumn 1943, the Tsetse had proven itself. It was no longer an experiment, but a weapon of precision. Coastal Command had a new tool, one that delivered power with accuracy at the moment it was needed most. The U-boats had gained a new enemy in the skies, and one they could neither outrun nor outgun. By December of 1943, the Tse-tse Mosquito had already earned a reputation as a fearsome new weapon. But it was on Christmas Day, in the cold waters of the Bay of Biscay, that it would demonstrate its full potential against a German U-boat. The target was U-976, a Type 7C submarine that had sailed from Saint-Nazaire on its way into the Atlantic. Like many U-boats of that winter, it faced a dangerous journey. Allied patrols now swept the bay relentlessly, and the Tsetse was waiting. That morning, a pair of Mosquitoes from 248 Squadron RAF spotted U-976 running on the surface. The sea was choppy, the sky leaden with cloud. The submarine's crew had little choice but to remain exposed. Batteries needed recharging. Air had to be ventilated. For a submarine, the surface was both a necessity and a death trap. The Tsetse dived in. German lookouts raised the alarm, and flak guns barked to life. Tracers stitched the air. But the Mosquito pressed on, the pilot lining up the massive 57mm cannon. At 200 yards, he fired. The recoil slammed through the aircraft. The first shell smashed into the U-boat's hull just forward of the conning tower, sending a plume of metal and spray skyward. The second shell tore into the pressure chamber. The third hit near the periscope housing, blasting fragments across the bridge. Sailors were thrown from their posts. The submarine tried to respond, its gunners firing wildly, but the damage was already critical. Pipes ruptured, compartments flooded, and vital systems went dead. The commander shouted for an emergency dive, but the U-boat could not submerge. It was trapped on the surface. Moments later, more Mosquitos arrived, rocket-armed fighter bombers sweeping in to finish the kill. They unleashed salvos that tore through the crippled submarine. Flames licked across the deck. Men leapt into the freezing sea as the vessel was abandoned. U-976, crippled by the Tsetse's cannon fire, sank beneath the waves. For the RAF, this was a textbook success. The Tsetse had done precisely what it had been designed to do: catch a submarine on the surface, deliver an immediate crippling strike, and hold it vulnerable for follow-up attacks. The Christmas Day attack sent ripples through both Coastal Command and the German Navy. British aircrews gained confidence in the weapon. German sailors learned that the Tsetse was more than rumor, it was a predator that could render their submarines helpless in seconds. From this point forward, the Tsetse was no longer viewed as a mere experiment. It was a proven tool of war, a specialized aircraft that could tip the balance in the unforgiving Battle of the Atlantic. As 1944 began, the Mosquito Tsetse would expand its role. No longer confined to submarine hunting, it would turn its firepower against German surface vessels, E-boats, and armed escorts along the coast. The 57mm cannon had proven its worth, and it would now be tested in even more dangerous waters. By the spring of 1944, the Mosquito Tsetse had already proven its value against German submarines. But as Allied pressure on the U-boat fleet increased, Coastal Command looked for other ways to use the aircraft's devastating firepower. The answer was found in the coastal convoys and fast attack craft that supplied and protected the German war effort. The Bay of Biscay, the English Channel, and the waters off the French coast teemed with targets: E-boats, armed trawlers, flak ships, and supply vessels. These were smaller and more agile than submarines, but they were also far more dangerous. Bristling with anti-aircraft guns, they could fill the sky with fire in seconds. Any attack meant flying into a storm of tracers. The Tsetse's cannon gave the RAF a new advantage. Unlike rockets, which spread across a wide pattern, the 57mm shells could be aimed with surgical precision. A single hit on a vessel's bridge could kill officers instantly. A shell into an engine room could disable a ship in moments. In this role, the Tsetse became the sniper of the sea war. One documented mission illustrates the point. A strike wing of Mosquitos spotted a small German convoy hugging the French coastline. As the rocket-armed aircraft prepared to attack, the Tsetse moved in first. Diving low, the pilot lined up the lead escort trawler. The first shell slammed through the bridge, shattering glass and killing crew instantly. A second shell struck the engine room, setting off a fire that engulfed the vessel within minutes. The trawler's gunners never recovered. Another example came during sweeps against German E-boats, the fast, nimble craft designed for nighttime torpedo attacks against Allied shipping. Normally hard to hit, these boats were vulnerable to the Tsetse's accurate fire. Crews recalled watching 57mm shells tear through hulls, splitting wooden frames and leaving engines silent. In a single pass, an E-boat could be disabled beyond repair. German sailors who survived described the fear of facing a Mosquito armed with what looked like a cannon barrel projecting from its nose. They knew that while rockets might miss, the Tsetse's shells rarely did. The damage was not only physical but psychological, a strike that came with terrifying suddenness. The Tsetse also operated as part of mixed strike wings. While rocket-armed Mosquitos fired salvos into convoys, the Tsetse delivered pinpoint shots, often crippling escorts so the rest of the formation could attack unopposed. Coastal Command reports highlighted the effectiveness of these tactics. Ships were lost, escorts destroyed, and the Germans forced to withdraw valuable vessels from the most dangerous routes. But these missions came at a cost. Strafing runs against heavily armed ships exposed the Mosquito to walls of flak. Crews recalled the thunder of shells exploding around them, fragments tearing into wings and fuselages. For the Tsetse, survival depended on speed, precision, and nerve. By mid-1944, as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of France, the Tsetse had earned a new reputation. It was not just a submarine hunter. It was a versatile strike aircraft, capable of delivering devastating, accurate firepower against both undersea and surface targets. Though only a handful of Tsetses ever flew in combat, their presence was felt across the coastal waters of occupied Europe. The 57mm cannon had turned the Mosquito into a weapon, unlike any other in the RAF arsenal, a hybrid of aircraft and artillery, feared by all who faced it on the open sea. By the summer of 1944, the balance of power in the Battle of the Atlantic had begun to shift. Allied code-breaking, long-range patrols, and escort carriers had made U-boat operations increasingly perilous. Yet the German submarines were still sailing from French bases into the Bay of Biscay, determined to disrupt the coming invasion of France. For the RAF, this was the moment to strike with maximum force. Enter the Strike Wing's coordinated groups of Mosquitoes designed to sweep enemy waters and eliminate anything that moved. These wings combined different variants of the aircraft: rocket-armed fighter bombers, machine gun-equipped escorts, and the rare cannon-armed Tsetse. Each had a role. Rockets delivered mass destruction. Guns kept German flak suppressed. And the Tsetse provided the precision shot, the ability to cripple a submarine before it could dive or disable an escort with a single blow. A mission in July 1944 captures the strategy in action. A wing of Mosquitoes sighted a U-boat running on the surface off the French coast. The Tsetse led the attack, diving low and unleashing a burst of 57mm fire. The shells ripped into the casing, rupturing ballast tanks and smashing through the conning tower. The submarine lurched, attempting a crash dive, but flooding forced it back to the surface. Moments later, the rocket-armed Mosquitoes swept in. Their salvos hammered the crippled U-boat, tearing open the hull. Flames and smoke engulfed the vessel before it finally rolled and sank beneath the waves. The crew abandoned ship, scattered across the water. For the Strike Wing, it was a textbook engagement. The Tsetse disabled the target, and the formation delivered the kill. Other missions followed the same pattern. In one patrol, Tsetse struck German escorts with pinpoint fire, knocking out gun positions and leaving ships exposed. Rocket salvos then destroyed the convoy outright. Coastal Command's reports noted that the combination was devastating. As one squadron commander observed, the Tsetse drew blood, and the rockets finished the job. For the Germans, the psychological toll was enormous. Crews now faced not only massed rocket attacks, but also the fear of a cannon shell crashing through their hulls before they could even react. Survivor accounts describe the dread of seeing Mosquitoes bearing down, one of them with the distinctive barrel protruding from its nose. They called it the giant gun Mosquito, and they knew its bite could be fatal. The Strike Wing operations of 1944 marked the Tsetse's peak. In small numbers, it played a vital role in crippling U-boats and escorts alike. But the strategy came with risk. Attacking heavily armed convoys meant flying through curtains of flak, and losses mounted. Crews knew that every sortie might be their last. Yet the results spoke for themselves. By late summer 1944, German U-boat operations in the Bay of Biscay had become nearly impossible. Convoys avoided the most dangerous waters. Submarines were forced to move by night under constant threat from the skies. And every time they surfaced, they risked facing the lethal precision of the Tse-tse Mosquito. Though never built in large numbers, The Tsetse had found its place in the strike wings of 1944 as the sharp point of a combined Allied spear, striking decisively in the final year of the Atlantic War. As 1945 began, the tide of war in Europe was irreversible. The Battle of the Atlantic, once a desperate fight for survival, had become a rout. Allied convoys crossed with greater safety, protected by long-range aircraft, escort carriers, and destroyer screens. German U-boat losses mounted to catastrophic levels. For the Tse-tse Mosquito, this meant fewer opportunities to prove its worth. The cannon-armed aircraft had shown that it could cripple submarines and disable escorts with surgical precision. But as the war entered its final months, massed attacks by rocket-armed and bomb-equipped Mosquitoes became the standard method of destruction. They were faster, simpler to operate, and easier to produce in large numbers. The Tsetse, by contrast, remained a specialist weapon. Only 27 had ever been converted. Each required specially trained crews, careful maintenance, and an understanding of how to aim and fire an artillery piece from the nose of a fighter aircraft. It was a tool of precision at a time when Allied strategy favored overwhelming firepower. Yet within Coastal Command, the Tsetse never lost its aura. Pilots remembered the thunderous recoil of the cannon, the way a single shell could split open a submarine's hull or silence a ship's bridge in an instant. German sailors who faced it recalled the fear of its sudden strikes, the knowledge that survival might come down to whether or not a single shell found its mark. By the end of the war, many of the surviving Tsetses were retired quietly, their unusual weaponry removed. They had been an experiment, a bold idea tested in the crucible of combat. And while they were too few to change the war alone, their story was one of daring innovation and of a weapon that left a mark out of all proportion to its numbers. The Mosquito Tsetse remains one of the most unusual aircraft of the Second World War. A wooden twin-engine fighter, transformed into a submarine killer by the addition of a 57mm tank cannon. Only a handful were ever built, yet their impact was felt across the Bay of Biscay and the coastal waters of Europe. Their role was never about numbers. It was about precision. The Tsetse gave the RAF the ability to strike at U-boats in the seconds that mattered most before they slipped beneath the surface. It gave Coastal Command a weapon that could pierce steel hulls, disable gun crews, and force submarines into the open where they could be destroyed. Against surface ships, it offered a sniper's accuracy that rockets could not always deliver. In the grand scale of the war, the Tsetse was a footnote, a rare experiment, soon overshadowed by rockets, bombs, and the sheer weight of Allied production. But to the men who flew it, and to the sailors who faced it, it was unforgettable. Today, the Tsetse is remembered not for how many were built, but for what it represented: the willingness to innovate, to take risks, and to turn even the unlikeliest ideas into weapons of war. A wooden aircraft, carrying a gun the size of an artillery piece, proved that ingenuity could be as decisive as numbers. In the long history of the Mosquito, the Tse-tse stands apart, a rare predator whose bite was feared by every U-boat that surfaced in the Bay of Biscay.